Hello, it's the 18th of August. This is Renew Every Morning. I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh and I'm thrilled that you're with me again, so thank you. Today in our teaching series, Living Fully by Grace, we're going to be thinking about the grace of becoming. Now, this is a big subject to me because this is about maybe a more kind of engaged grace, a more active grace, where it literally goes on from just this notion of being and becoming, which is the theme I want to think about. And I'm going to be thinking from a verse in 2 Corinthians 3, which I'm sure you'll know very well. And it's actually 3:15 and 3:18. Notice that end of that statement. It's very well worth you reading 2 Corinthians 3 just generally because it's such an extraordinary argument that Paul makes. But the argument is resolved in this statement here where he says, you see that whenever the law is read, Paul says, or he calls it Moses, he said whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over our hearts. But, says Paul, when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. All right, so watch that. Now the Lord is the Spirit, says Paul. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. What a great statement. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And here's the statement. And we all with unveiled faces, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. Do you know, that verse takes me back 25 years or more when we first started the Grace Project and the Abundant Life Church. I remember teaching this verse. There's some which is called Unveiled Faces, and this to me is such a beautiful idea. And there we were, whatever it was, 80, 100 of us, or however many were in the room, and you could just see these wonderful faces that had been unveiled. They were free from the law of Moses, and they were beginning to be transformed from one degree of glory into another, and it was wonderful. And it's those degrees of glory that I want to push into now, because the unveiling is one thing, but he says one degree of glory to another, and it's to the next degree of glory that I want to really move here. Now, let's ask a few questions. Whenever I'm looking at scripture and I see statements, I always want to then just interrogate them a little bit and say, well, what does that mean? So, and here's a statement. Paul says, we all are being transformed. So the question I'm left with then is saying, is that optional or is it inevitable? So this idea of transformed is this kind of metamorphosis idea. So if you like, we're all going through from our caterpillar phase into our butterfly phase. All of us, is Paul saying. Well, the question then is it all of us? Is it only some, or is it all? And if it's all, is there a kind of, is it inevitable? Is it bound just in our earthly lifetime, or is it maybe part of a much wider arc of God's work? And so let's see the frame, because for me the frame of this text is saying we're not just talking about my spiritual growth now that I've come to Christ. What I think we're looking at here is God's cosmic transformation project. Now, because for me, Paul's we all is inclusive. And I think it offers a wider and more exciting vision. So to me, inclusivity in the we all in 2 Corinthians 3 refers, of course, to those who have turned to Christ. I understand that. But I think Paul has a wider vision and a wider agenda, which suggests a kind of ever expanding, ever increasing until the very last one. To all of humanity, all of us come to that point of consciousness. That's what I think, because I think there's a kind of mystical trajectory that Paul's already told us about in the previous letter in 1 Corinthians 15, that God will be all and in all. And it's not saying God will be some in some, or some in all, or in all but not some, or in some but not all. He's saying God will be all and in all. Now, to me, that is the end of this story, is universal reconciliation. I used to talk for a long time what I call universal recognition, that we, each and every one of us, will come to that aha moment, will come to that awakening moment where the veil will be lifted. Every human being in my mind will come to that point. And I don't think this transformation is some sort of optional, opt-in Christian idea. I think is the destiny of all creation, is what I think. Now, folks like Gregory of Nicaea would, I think, say that this transformation is inevitable because Gregory saw the soul's journey as an unending ascent into God, an eternal becoming, he would call it. To my mind, this idea of Christ is all and in all beings have the Christ nature. Everything has the Christ nature. All creation is groaning, waiting for the sons of God to be revealed, it says in Romans. And so awakening to me is not adding something foreign, but it's unveiling what's already there. That to me is the point. Revelation isn't pulling back the curtain to show you something that never existed before you pulled back the curtain. It's pulling back the curtain to show you something that existed but you couldn't see it because of the curtain. Their faces are, once the veil is removed, that's the point, right? That's how I would see it. So this, to me, there's an inevitability. It's the image of God, the image Deo, image Dei, as it says in Latin, is the deepest truth of each and every one of us. And Christ is the perfect image. And if that's the case, which he is, then becoming Christ is simply becoming ourselves in fullness. Well, now, are there certain speeds and certain obstacles? I guess there are. I think there are things that can accelerate that process, but equally things that can slow it down. Things that can frustrate it, but not ultimately. So, for example, I think an accelerant might be, for instance, if I was to be open-hearted. I think open-heartedness, that returning again and again and again to the awareness of Christ, is an accelerant. I think egolessness, that kenosis, that emptying oneself to be filled with the Spirit, is an accelerant. I think non-attachment is an accelerant. Letting go of the need to control outcomes. Oh my God. In the current world that I'm functioning in, the way the world is working at the moment, dear God, am I having to think carefully about this, because I'm seeming to want to, everything seems so out of control that I just want to control everything. But non-attachment means just letting go of the need to do that and to allow yourself to be more windblown. And that I believe in my deepest soul, I think, except in my behavior, I'm not so sure. Compassionate action. So this is the idea of if you like, transformation that happens in the giving, not just in the contemplation. So there's something about the idea that there has to be movement, there has to be action, there has to be the engagement, the activation of stuff, I guess. Those things seem to me to be accelerants. There are frustrators as well. There are blockers, no doubt about that. Self-effort, self-righteousness. When we see this spiritual project as an ego project, trying to become holy, trying to prove our worth. Attachment to form. Dear God, when we cling to old identities, when we cling to old roles or veils, if you like, they obscure the image of God and naturally frustrate the process. Judgment of ourselves, judgment of other people, that hardens the heart. Discrimination, exclusion, all these separation, all these things slow down the process. And then, ironically, the other thing that slows down the process is trying to hurry it up. Mistaking speed for progress. These things are all, I think, frustrators, blockers. But then the question is, well, what's the agenda? What's the kind of, the journey time for this? In my business, we're always writing different timelines and doing sprints to get projects done and so on. Well, is this a sprint? Do we need some sort of agile spirituality to get this done? Does it work in Chronos? Does it work in Kairos? Does it work in eternity? Well, you see, Chronos time, if you like, is measured in our kind of earthly time, what it says on your watch. The seasons and the increments where we see one degree of glory to another. Kairos time, that's kind of God's time. That's where transformation could just happen in those sudden moments of awakening or insights. It's lovely when you read the book of Mark, for example, you have these lovely moments where it says, and suddenly, and immediately. That's kind of God's time. And then there's eternity, which is kind of Paul's cosmic view, I think. And that points perhaps to a time beyond earthly constraints, because remember, eternity is in God, time is in God. So that's an important thing to say. He is timeless. God lives in an eternal now. So do bear that in mind. God's becoming in us is not constrained to one lifetime or your clock. If you were talking from a Buddhist perspective, you'd be talking about samsara. You'd be talking about the idea of these endless cycles, and this awakening in their construct is timeless, and that's an interesting idea. So the thing here as well, though, is this idea for me of 1 Corinthians 15, which is where it all lands for me. This is where it kind of ends up and where I feel very passionate about this, is that Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:28, I've already referenced it, but he says, the Son himself will also be subjected to him who put all things in subjection under him. So it doesn't say he put some things and not other things. He says he put all things in subjection under him, that he may... that God may be all and in all. See, I don't think you can get around that. All means all, right? That can't mean anything other than that. So for me, the grace of becoming is God's own life filling all things. The end is not just kind of some personal holiness. It's universal communion. It's universal oneness. We live now in participation, not in the completion, just at this stage. And our task, I guess, is to stay open, it's to stay present, it's to stay yielded, it's to stay not trying to induce anything, not trying to resist anything, just trusting the Spirit's pace. So maybe the takeaway today is this. Maybe it's simply that the grace of becoming is unveiling, simply the unveiling of what has always been true, that God is in us and as us. That whether it's slowly or over the years, or it's suddenly or in a moment, whether it's in this life or beyond, in the end, the result is the same. God will be all and in all. And you know what? If it takes an eternity for that to happen, it'll be well worth the wait. Have a great day. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.